Stop in the name of the law. So, hey guys, that was my not so great Peter Weller impression of Robocop. So, for the day's movie review, I'm going to be talking about the original 1987 Robocop, starring Peter Weller. Uh, the obvious reason, too, that I want to review specifically this version of Robocop as well is, with the remake coming out soon that stars, Samuel L. Jackson and Gary Oldman and Michael Keaton and a few other people. Olivia Munn's real life boyfriend plays the new RoboCop in the remake as well. And I guess Jose Padilla has done some pretty big stuff in Australia, but we're not talking about the remake today. We're talking about the original RoboCop, the one that started it all, the one that definitely turned this character into an iconic '80s character, specifically in the action and sci-fi genre. So let's talk about RoboCop. So in this film, you guys, obviously most of you probably have seen it. We want to hear my thoughts about the movie, but I do want to go over just kind of a brief synopsis of what the film is about. This cop is in action one day. It takes place in the future, the not so distant future, where the police department and law enforcement in general, they're trying to improve upon their technology, and they have this really good cop that is really valued in this Detroit city in the future. And he gets shot down in action one day while on the job, and he has just enough of his body left. And there's, he's not really dead, but he's not really alive. He's kind of in the middle of it. And so what they do is they immediately take him in. They take him in by I think air flight, air flight medic, and they bring him into this law enforcement laboratory that was just recently built, and they turn him into this thing they like to call a RoboCop, and he's one of the first people that they actually perform this on, and so they're able to bring him back to life. And even though he's not human, he's kind of half human, half machine, and he is a kind of the next phase, the next basically the future of law enforcement from what they're hoping. And so, throughout the rest of the film, he's trying to track down this guy that, made him this way, the person that kind of killed his human self in a way. And he's also, learning how to, have feelings again. He's dreaming again, even as this robot, and at first he was just kind of, they gave him orders and he followed them. But after a while, he really starts to feel, kind of his past human self happening to him. And he really starts to get curious about, like the family he once had, and kind of the things he would do when he's not at work and things like that. So he's trying to learn how to be human, even though he's a machine. And throughout the rest of the film, there's this plot, that I don't want to get into too much detail on, but it's kind of, there's a mole inside the police department, and they have a perfect plan as to how, RoboCop is not going to be able to interfere with the plan, and so it's basically a cop trying to be a half human, half machine, reborn again, while also trying to not only track down the killer that made him this way, but he also has to deal with this thing going on in the police department that might make the police department ran by people that I don't think the general public would want if they found out that people like this was happening in the police department, which you'll find out near the end of the film of who these exact individuals are. So RoboCop, you guys, obviously it is a classic, and it is a classic, action sci-fi film from the 1980s, late 80s, and obviously there's going to be some iconic moments. There is some iconic lines that have still to this day in 2014 have still lived up to all these years of RoboCop being around. But for the positives and negatives of this film, I think the machine that remembers his human self aspect of it, I think, is a very interesting thing. Even one of the better things going on in the movie. I just really like how, this there is this human living in this machine, and being that. With that being said, there's this soul living this machine, and this guy is trying to remember who he was, and really curious to see, like what house he once lived in, and who his wife and son were, and things like that. So there is that aspect of the story that I think was really, really interesting. And from what I know about the remake, and from what I'm hoping about the remake, it sounds like they're going to explore that aspect some more. I like that there's a bad cop in the police system. I thought that it definitely was not really a twist, but it was kind of an interesting approach in the movie because at first you think that you're just watching, these everyday cops on the job, and then this one guy just so happens to become a robotic police officer. But there's a little bit more going on to that. There's this insider that you don't want to really be in there in the police department, and there's a subplot involving that. So I thought it was kind of an interesting take on the movie and an interesting way to add an additional villain to the movie. There were some very good action scenes in here. I can definitely see why this is always viewed as a classic. While it still lives up in some ways for 2014 to this day, because there are some pretty good action scenes in the movie. There's also some reasonable futuristic worries for these characters. People worrying about because the Detroit city is getting worse and worse with crime. How are the police officers going to be able to stay up 24 hours a day and things like that? And the film's kind of about like what can a human still do for a career, and then what are some things that these machines and robots, because there's other robots and machines that are used in the movie that are not just RoboCop, other things that the police department are going to use, and people are starting to worry, well, our police officers going to be out of a job because of these things, and so just some really interesting takes on, what is a good technology, what's useful technology, but when does it draw the line when when there's a human work and then there's work for artificial things and robots. I like how the film kind of draws the line of these are the things that human beings have to do, and then these are the things that technology can do, but at the same time by taking away certain things from human cops, you're almost taking away jobs because you have all these technology stuff floating around in the city. I liked the first person RoboCop perspective, specifically when RoboCop first becomes RoboCop. Really interesting perspective. You really got the impression that you are RoboCop inside this helmet, and I like how we kind of get the feeling that Peter Weller's character is feeling with, who are these people? What am I? How did I become this way? And so, I really liked that perspective. We really get the impression that he's kind of not really brainwashed, but he's kind of starting his life over as this RoboCop. And it's just really interesting to see, specifically when we first see RoboCop, what are these things he's seeing inside his helmet as he's walking around and things like that. I really liked Peter Weller's believable robotic movements. You can definitely tell. And there's even a shot of Peter Weller here where he's inside the RoboCop when he has his helmet off. Um, you really get the impression that he really is this robot. You really don't get an impression that you're watching a human actor, because there's really some scenes where he really seems like he can't move his joints a certain way in this robotic suit and things. And so Peter Weller did a very good job kind of limiting himself of okay, I can move like this, but if I move like this, then I look too human, and things like that. So I really liked how Peter Weller really approached this role as a robot. He really feels like a robot when he is RoboCop in the movie. For negatives of this film, and I know a lot of people are really going to hate me for saying some of these things, but these are some things that, looking back at this film in 2014 and kind of really looking and examining the movie, I think these are some things that RoboCop really needs to improve upon, as far as, being up there with Terminator and Lethal Weapon and other films that are very much in the line of what this movie was kind of, all about, and what those films are all about. For the negatives, I do think this film is a little bit outdated. There's some scenes in here where, like, I understand this is filmed in the 80s, but it's like, come on, why do they have 80s television sets and it's a future setting? It's just like, don't you think you'd want to make the budget, make it look like you're inside these futuristic homes where there's maybe TVs built into the wall, or things, something like what Back to the Future Part 2 did, where they have multiple channels going on at once, or just do something inside these homes that really makes us feel like we're in the future. Because from what I saw here, it basically was the 1980s, but inside this futuristic city. And I really think, I don't know if that was just a budgeting decision or what that was, but it really didn't feel, specifically when we're inside the interior environments of this film, it really didn't feel like the future. It really just felt like the 1980s within like a Blade Runner looking futuristic city. This is a pretty standard action robot film. I mean, there's really, when comparing it to like Terminator and things like that, this is pretty low compared to those. I mean, it definitely. I didn't leave this film saying, "Oh, this is in the league of Terminator." I mean, I really didn't. I really wasn't that blown away by it, and I got to be honest, I really was not as blown away by it as I, when I first saw Terminator and Terminator 2, and other films of its kind. So as far as being in that same league as those other big films, I gotta say RoboCop kind of is subpar compared to those things. The family side of the story, I think, should have been explored some more. It's way too brief in the movie, and I think it was one of the more interesting things the film had going for it before it blew it off completely. So that could be something that is explored in the remake, and who knows, the remake might be an even better film because of it. But I mean, we get slight hints of these family moments with Peter Weller's character, and I would say there's no more than 10 minutes of it in the movie. And that's really disappointing because I would have liked to have seen some scenes in here that really feel like there is this human inside this machine. And unfortunately, the film kind of blows that perspective off the film. I would say a good hour or so into the movie. I think there needs to be a better wrap up to the movie because the film just kind of randomly ends. There really wasn't a conclusion in the movie. Just kind of like, okay, well, this person died, this person died. Peter Weller just accepts that he's RoboCop now, and it just kind of ends. I mean, there really isn't an ending to the movie, so it needs a better wrap up. I thought. And like I understand, I know that there was sequels and things like that, but as far as wrapping up this one individual movie, I think they really needed to wrap it up better in some way. I would have liked to see more character development and backstories because we really don't get to learn about these characters in the movie. I mean, we just see Peter Weller's character on the job right away in the movie. We really don't get to know about the president of this company, and we don't get to know about the people he works with very well. Like we understand, we know who they are throughout the movie, but we really don't, like, for example, with Nancy Allen's character, we don't get to see her at home at all. We don't get to see her backstory. We don't get to see how Peter Weller's character kind of affects her cop life. With the villain of the movie, I mean, we see him right away in a crime scene, and Peter Weller chases after him, and we really don't get to learn about this character very much. We obviously get to see the business angle and what's going on at the police department and things like that, but I would have liked to have seen a film where we get to see Peter Weller's characters at home more often and things like that. And so, like I said, this could be something explored in the remake. But as far as what this film could have done, I would have much rather seen a film about character development and more backstories and less on these action scenes because the film almost abuses the action scenes so it doesn't have to worry about telling these really critical things that make a really good film work. Like I was just explaining, the action scenes and cheats are used throughout the movie to skip plot points. There's a lot of points in the movie where, there's this huge, huge thing going on in the plot, and either the film ignores it by just excusing it with a big action scene, or it uses cheats, or it just uses something so it doesn't have to worry about going over that plot point in the movie. So I think that kind of wears the film down a bit. But overall, guys, I give RoboCop the original 1987 version an 8.8 out of 10, not an 8.5. So a solid 8 out of 10. I think it is a good film, but like I said, there's a lot of things they could have explored some more, like the family life of this character and things of that nature. And I would have liked to see more to character development and backstory. And because the action scenes are good, but they're not outstanding, I would have much rather prefer a film that very much is about a character study over this, you know, let's put as many action scenes in the film so we don't have to worry about storyline kind of a movie. So RoboCop, pretty good film. It'll be interesting to see what I think of the remake. I may or may not compare them in the remake review, or I might just make a separate video comparing this film and the remake. So we'll have to see what happens. But for now, guys, RoboCop's a decent film. I wouldn't say it's the classic that you heard about, but it's good, and it'll be interesting to see what I think of the remake coming out soon.